Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck design video. Today I'm going to be going over a new experimental deck that I've been tinkering around with. This is my current alpha list, essentially the first list I've actually put into paper form, and this deck has had 0 playtesting. So while I'm at this stage, essentially it is all theory and research and essentially assuming card interactions and how things will pan out. After some time, of course, I go through and edit and make modifications for what is good, but I want to go ahead and just shoot out the original list here. This is for Maralen of the Mornsong. I am getting her name entirely confused with the new Maralen, the black-green experience general, but this is Maralen. She is a elf wizard, a 2/3 for 1 black. This is also another rare thing some of my friends are going to point out. I typically hate elves, like I will hate out an elf player. I'm the goblin or sliver player, and tribally that is. I just don't like elves, but this is one I don't mind playing. She is a very special general. I like doing experimental decks around generals that don't see a lot of play. She does see some play, but the reason I've chosen to pursue her as an experimental general, because when I did my initial research, almost every single deck list that came up was some stupid combo deck using Ad Nauseam, and her just to tutor up Ad Nauseam. Ad Nauseam being an instant where you can draw and hurt yourself for mana cost of cards, and the decks would just tutor up that using her and then just go off using one of 3 win conditions like the epic card or tendrils or whatever that I think sickening dreams, you discard X to burn X, something like that. But look, if you go Google search Maralen of the Mornsong EDH, almost all of the decks you see are that, and that is just so boring. She has such a fun mechanic that I just don't understand why she doesn't get a lot more attention. I understand some of the concepts, but I'll get into that, and this deck is actually it's interesting. So again, she's 3 mana for 2/3 wizard elf. She has the basically a static ability that says players cannot draw cards. That is actually my entire focus on this deck. Like, yeah, the other ability here is on each player's upkeep, beginning of their draw step, that is, they get to Grim Tutor, which is lose 3, look for a card in their deck, shuffle, then put that in their hand. This is mandatory, even if they choose to. You can't actually fail to find in this scenario. You have to pull a card out of your deck. So it's a tax effect. A lot of people will use her as an awkward tutor just to get some combo piece. There's a few combos that work with her, and like players can't search their library thing, like Stranglehold. But as her as the general, again, most people just think it's a bad idea to give your opponent a free tutor. But the fact that so many people are familiar with either her going ad nauseam or just wanting to bank off value, I thought that this would be a really interesting take for it is a mono black control deck, but in personal opinion and history, most mono black controlled generals just make very boring game starts for the first few turns. This one, it's another red herring effect for disruption and early game nonsense, but it will make for very interesting games. So again, it's very important. The main thing to keep in mind, players can't draw cards. Entire deck like that, when you think about EDH of how many staples this bricks in my deck or the opponent's, things like a Phyrexian Arena is not in this deck because I can't draw cards. But also the opponent's Muldrifter, their Ancestral Visions, or not recall, yeah. Something like even a Sphinx's Revelation, things like that just brick. They are dead cards, and a lot of people miss that. Depending on your level of douchebaggery, you may want to remind them the first time they try to do something like that, or just tell them to put the card in the graveyard because they made a mistake. But again, this is something, designing a deck with that in mind, you have to weigh 2 very big options. Obviously, this is a powerful effect, tutoring. A lot of people will not let her stay out for very long. So, would you want to put draw stuff in your deck? Or would you actually tune your entire deck with the intention of finding some pseudo card advantage that's technically not draw, but still let you get a card? So that's kind of where I went. The deck is full of, there's no quote-unquote draw effects in this deck. I know she is not going to stay out for very long, but I wanted to always have the opportunity to have some pseudo card advantage. There's a few routes that this deck has like an ideal game plan, and I'll have to get to that after you guys see the deck list. So after the land nonsense are done, I'll just come back and chatter more about her. But again, Keep in mind, players cannot draw cards. That's the important part of the deck, why we're actually running her. Second part, yeah, free Grim Tutors, that's nice. Again, it's always fun politics. In early games, you may be tempted to shoot her out. And of course, it's going to rotate out. Your next opponent to your left will get to tutor first. The question is, are they going to tutor for early ramp, removal to kill her, or are they just going to keep letting it sit? There are punishment effects in this deck. Are they going to let themselves be susceptible to the punishment effect before they get an answer for it? Or are they going to let the next opponent to their left also be damaged by the punishment effect? That's kind of where this game is. It's a little bit of head games, but let's get through the deck and I'll chatter more. So, it is a mono-black control deck, MBC, whatever you want to call it. So there's very few creatures, usually the usual suspects. We have the 3 flesh bag variants, pretty cheap and easy, universal effects for a multiplayer table. Now we have a Burnished Heart. It is ramp. We can technically recur. There's not a lot of creature recursion here. I'm not really reanimating, but it's a 2-for-1, which is again good if you can't draw. Solemn, he does have the word draw a card, but he's more importantly here for that land ramp. And same thing, Lily Shade made the cut simply because it's a replacement effect that gives me the all-important swap. Cryptogast is here for mana doublers. There's about 3 cards I'm missing, like generic expensive stuff like Demonic Tutor, Damnation, whatnot, but 3 cards I really want for this deck are an Urborg, a Nirkana Revenant, and I'm missing something. Oh, a Barter and Blood. So, but here's essentially Nirkana Revenant 2.0. Puppeteer Click is a placeholder until I get said Nirkana Revenant. Sidisi is a tutor. This is, I believe, one of 2 hard tutors in the deck, maybe? Yeah, I think she's really the only hard tutor. Stuffy Doll is a punishment effect. We have the Pestilence versions in this deck. One of my favorite cards is Pestilence, and this is really good to put out there. Again, this is a mono-black control deck wanting to go to late game, so something like this is really good at keeping people away from me. Unless, of course, a creature has flying or trample. And this is the one primary, probably the scariest punishment effect with Maralen. Whenever an opponent searches their library, they sack a creature and lose 2 life. She forces the search. You can't just fail to find, but you have to search. So with these 2 out, essentially it bleeds out everyone for 13 on their upkeep, or opponents for 13. And they have to sack a creature. This is not a win condition. This would be considered a mid-game plan, like a mid-game threat to bait out removal and expend opponents' resources to make them deal with this. He is very scary in comparison here, but again, this is not something that you're giving them free tutors on the same time this happens. You may hit someone for 13, but they will most likely get removal for that. Again, this is where you get the fun politics. Are you really going to immediately get that removal, or are you going to let this also smash the next opponent to your left also before you decide to go get removal for this? So that's kind of the direction the deck is going. Let's go on to the spells. There's a massive complement of spells here. These are not situated in instances and sorceries like I usually do. These are broken to what the spells do, because some of these spells are just awkwardly placed, but they are pseudo card advantage without drawing. So we have a lot of removal. Snuff Out is usually the free one. Then we have Ashes to Ashes to exile 2 things. This is a great early game tutor. If you know your opponents are playing combo, she helps combo decks, and a combo player may go off before you can actually stabilize, but this is a great early tutor just to remove a potential combo part. Innocent Blood is a great universal, and this is the placeholder for the Damnation. Then we have the 3-drop removal, a 4-drop removal, a 6-drop removal. This one's nice and new. It's really good against token decks and whatnot. And then we have a 7-drop removal, so we can reanimate something good with value. And then a Decree of Pain. Rules check. This actually, if I board wipe with Maralen out, he is not it's not that last known effect thing won't kick in, so I actually will draw cards, so that's actually worth keeping. I think that's the actually only draw spell in the deck that's actually designed for drawing. Now, again, this is a mono-black control deck. The long-term win condition are bleed spells. This one only hits creatures, but it's an instant. Suffer the Past is one I used to tinker with a lot. It is an X burn spell, but it's not just limited to mana. It also requires cards in an opponent's graveyard. It's also really just a nice, quick removal of some reanimation targets. Essentially just, it is a highly situational card, usually something you may not see main decked. But in this style of deck, I am bleeding myself as well as the opponents, so a lot of life gain is actually pretty nice. Consuming Consume Spirit is the newer, better version of Drain Life, but of course we have the worse version of Drain Life in Soulburn. It costs 1 more, but that's there because you may spend red mana. We can't do that in this deck, but it's just another burn spell. Corrupt is the one that's always going to cost 6 and hopefully have a lot of lands. And the Profane Command is a bleed spell with some other modes. And finally, an Exsanguinate, a typical win condition. Really, it's the normal game-ending spell in this style of deck. Now we have some general utility cards, kind of dirtily cards, just to dick around with the opponents. This could be a tutor for about half of those burn spells I just passed through, since X does not count when searching. This also could be more graveyard removal. Mostly, this is just a tutor for 2. It's a pseudo-situational tutor. There's also another card coming up in my artifacts that I also like using this to tutor for. Withering Boon is a random counterspell. Again, if you know your opponents are playing creature-based combos early game that may just win really early, this may be really good to get. Darkness for the random fog. Imp's Mischief. I love this card. I usually try to slip this in as a shenanigans card. A lot of people miss that this can counter a counterspell. You change the target of a spell with a single target. A counterspell targets a spell. Now, counterspells can't target themselves, but you can change the target of a counterspell to target Imp's Mischief. So essentially, Imp's Mischief would resolve first. The counterspell then has no legal target and fizzles, and then your spell that you want to resolve goes through. But this is also great because this can help us like kill artifacts or enchantments if someone goes to beast within something. Sudden Spoiling is another generic fog effect, or it may stop some combos, whatnot. Praetor's Grasp is there to get us whatever we really need. This is like a tutor for the opponents. Of course, it's going to be black or artifact based. This may just get a Soul Ring. And finally, there are 2 alpha cards in this deck. Well, this is my favorite artwork for this card. I hate the alpha artwork of this. But again, this is a big mana deck. No one really wants to chump block Maralen if they have not gotten a benefit. I can almost always safely attack the person to my left, and they will not want to block this before they can actually get it. Even if there's a few punishment effects out, or unless there's something really, really scary, like this guy, no one's going to let this die in combat. So a random pump spell may just actually get someone with combat damage. Hatred is the ideal inclusion, but again, this is a deck where I am also bleeding a lot. She hurts me. So Hatred is dangerous, and especially in a multiplayer game. So I went with my favorite artwork of Howl from Beyond. I love that card. Now, there are some pseudo card advantage spells that I was able to slip in. I chose to put a few of the creature return from graveyard hand kind of spells, some that had additional effects. I love the artwork on this one. This has a Clash. Now, it's always fun to dirtle a little bit. If you know you can't get the card off the top of your deck because you're going to tutor and shuffle, revealing the Clash card is kind of funny just to mess with the opponent, because you're giving them false information and they may forget that you don't actually have that card. So that's the idea behind this. I used to play this a lot earlier, but I've usually played it because I love the artwork. This one is here because of that exact effect. I can kind of scrap brain the opponent just a tad bit. This is another really good generic mono black control card. It returns a creature or both a creature or a land. People like blowing up Cabal Coffers. This is usually why it's in the deck. Dark Deal. This is the first cruel punishment card that actually goes with her. People can't draw cards. This may be one of the first cards I tutor for in an environment where I may not die hyper fast, because if I tutor for this and cast it, everyone loses their hand. So normally you're supposed to discard your hand and draw up to that many -1 for each opponent. It's like a weak Wheel of Fortune. With her out, everyone, including myself, just dumps their hand. And again, I will get to this after I'm done with the video, or the cards in the deck list, but the ideal game plan here in this deck is to, number 1, make sure my opponents do not know I'm playing, well, make sure they are aware I'm not playing a combo deck. Then get her out. Then try to tutor up some kind of pseudo card advantage permanent, which we're getting to. And then if that's all good and dandy and no one's killed me yet, get something to really mess the opponents up, like this. Putting everyone in top deck mode tends to piss people off, but it's equal if I myself am in top deck mode. Bitter Revelation is a strange version of Fact or Fiction. This does not draw cards. This puts cards into my hand. So it looks at 4, choose any 2 of them to put in my hand, lose 2, put the rest in my graveyard. So it's a weird Fact or Fiction. It's a sorcery speed, but it puts cards into my hand. Technically, it's card advantage without the word draw. Same thing, Moonlight Bargaining. This is the much better version. It's 5 mana, it's instant speed, and I can get up to 5, but it hurts a lot. This is usually a really good card in reanimation decks, but in this deck, not quite trying to reanimate. Let's go on to the other permanents. There's a few enchantments. Oubliette, this is another typically automatic staple I shoe into mono black decks on my original drafts. It's a fun card, it's really not that good. It's an old Oblivion Ring. It can exile a creature. If there's enchantments or anything on it like counters, they stay on it. So you have to remember, so that way if this thing blows up, for example, if you have like a Skullbriar, the Walking Grave, and this thing is blown up, Skullbriar can return with all those counters. But it's an exile effect. The first draft when I was writing this deck up had lots of exile spells, like Sever the Bloodlines, or what's that new one? Silence the Believers, that's a good one too. Essentially exile, because I thought everyone would just tutor up essentially important cards and I could just exile them permanently. Some of those are really good. This new spells are strictly better than this, but this one's lingering because it's an old favorite. Then we have, this is another fun card too, Shade's Form. It gives any creature shade, and I can pay this, or put this on an opponent's creatures. The cool thing is when the creature dies, I get the creature. So again, I can put this on an opponent's creature, which is good politics. There's actually a newer card printed in Avacyn Restored, I believe, which is 2 and a black that just has that part of the paragraph. It's missing this entire part. But again, it's a mono black deck with lots of mana doublers coming up, and again, big creature, high damage. Politics, getting an opponent's creature back, fun things. Necropotence is the scary card. Again, I do skip my draw step. It's a pseudo non-bow with my general, because if I skip my draw step, I skip the tutor. But this puts cards into my hand. So at some point in the game, if I do not require a very specific card, I can choose to go get this and just fill my hand up a whole bunch. This is also a very scary threat. A lot of people don't like seeing this. They will auto-target you if this resolves. It's kind of necessary here. Spoiler alert, I'm playing Snowlands. This is a snow version of Pestilence. I really like the beta artwork of Pestilence, but I'm giving this one a go too because I like this one as well. But anyways, Withering Wisp is a Pestilence for Snowlands. The awkwardness here is I can only pay up to the number of lands. It's not just a mana sink like Pestilence. Both of these enchantments do the same thing. This one just costs cheaper and has that restriction. Where as long as there's creatures in play, they stay in play. But at the end of turn, if there's no creatures, they die. And they cannot be regenerated. But essentially I can play black to deal 1 damage to each creature player. These two are really, really good with Exquisite Blood, which says whenever a creature, or when an opponent loses life, I gain that much life. So that essentially means that these guys turn all my lands into extort triggers. Which, while it won't win me games, it's really good in long grindy games where I'm just trying to bleed people out. It's a pseudo Punisher effect. And Exquisite Blood is just really good too because every time my opponent tutors, I get the life. Let's go on through here. Painful Quandary. This is probably one of the next cards that will be cut. This is a very powerful effect, but this is also a very scary enchantment. When people realize that they're losing about 8 life a turn just between these two together, and they have to discard cards, things like that, the card disadvantage scares people, and they will most likely find removal for my permanents. It's essentially overly exaggerated as a threat. Then Wound Reflection doubles things up. It's one-sided, so it can make my Corrupt that may not kill people actually kill people. It also means that my opponents will end up losing 6 life per turn. 3 life, people may not think that's a whole bunch, but 6 life, that actually adds up really fast. And let's go on to the artifact now. There's not a whole bunch of early game ramp. We have my 2 favorites, 1-drop Soul Ring and 1-drop Wayfarer's Bauble. Again, I like having lands in play, basic lands, as many as possible, so this one's really good. And then we have a few other techie things. This one's here just to get our coffers. Again, I'm missing an Urborg, otherwise I'd be in here. And again, if you don't know what snow-covered lands do, there is a Scrying Sheets and also a Thawing Glaciers in here. 2 very important lands for pseudo card advantage without the word draw in them. So this is a good card. Familiar's Fear is a janky card that usually is not worth the cut in most decks, but this is a card that could be a 2-for-1 in a deck where I don't want cards that say quote-unquote draw cards. It's gonna stay for a little bit, I guess. This is the 2-drop that I may tutor early game because it is, again, pseudo card advantage. This is not a scary permanent, but it lets me make land drops very quick and early. So after I dump someone's hand, or before I'm about to dump everyone's hand, this is a prime target. Jar of Eyeballs. They just spoiled the brain in a jar, which looks fun. Sadly, it doesn't do what this does. This one just says whenever a creature I control dies, put 2 counters on this. I don't have a lot of creatures, so again, this doesn't really look threatening, but I can pay 3 and remove, look at the top X, and I can put 1 into my hand. The good thing is this is not sacrificed, so while it is not quick advantage, it eventually may get me some cards. Mimic Vat is also a generic filler. If there's a better card I can discover that goes with this deck, it will be replacing this. Sword of the Animist. This is great card advantage. Again, people really don't like blocking Maralen. So I can very quickly tutor something like this to play, and if the opponent to my left is unlikely to want to block her, every single turn he will most likely take 3 combat damage from Maralen. That is the idea, of course. Again, I need to play test this to see how that pans out, but again, this will be card advantage when I dump the opponent's hands. We have 2 scary win conditions here with Lash Writhe and Nightmare Lash. Again, I'm tricking around with just a handful of creatures and a big scare Maralen. And there's a lot of edict effects like mutual edicts like the Innocent Blood, so I may be able to get somebody. And then we have the normal mana doublers with Gauntlet of Might, or Gauntlet of Power and Cage Sun. And the last scary thing in the deck, like that wheel effect, that dark deal, Teferi's Puzzle Box is the second mid-game threat I will try to tutor for. Because it acts just like that. Everyone puts their cards in the bottom of their deck and they draw up that many. If she is out, people cannot draw, so they put the cards in their hand on the bottom of their deck. And then they are forced to start tutoring, putting everybody into top deck mode as early as turn 4. Again, that is the initial goal of the deck. When I realized this interaction, that's when I actually started doing the research. Hindsight, I have about a playset of these in foil. They have gone ridiculously expensive. I'm about to sell them. You can actually pick this card for about $2 if you want the Visions one. But this interaction together is really good. In early game, this is also really good as well. This may actually backfire depending on who you're playing against. Although I can't get into that. I have a few friends who play different decks. One close one who plays Arjun. I have a buddy who plays in a zombie deck, and I have a buddy who plays a Arcanist deck. And bricking those decks with her first text makes me feel like a douchebag, so I'm going to see how I can work around that here. And let's go to the lands. My battery's flickering. 2 seconds. Okay, battery issue cited. I forgot there is one Singleton Planeswalker in the deck. This is another early game tutor for quote-unquote card advantage. If I am playing against opponents that do not have an offensive creature state, like they're not aggro decks, and I can protect her for a turn or 2, this is great to get out because the emblem down here is fantastic, but right here, this essentially means I can get an extra card every turn. So after I dump everyone's hand, if there's no aggressive creatures, she is fantastic because I will get a few extra cards before everyone stabilizes. Now, to the lands. Again, I am missing an Urborg. I want an Urborg. A temple that untaps land would be great too, but I'm actually wanting to have about 32 snow-covered lands in here as a stable number because I'm running a Scrying Sheets. Coffers is here for gross amounts of mana. That's what decks with Exsanguinate do. Then we have Winding Canyon, so I can flash her out at the end of an opponent's turn. So if I need to make an emergency tutor, and I can get up to about 6 mana, I can just hold this up and then flash her in. Then I can get the tutor for whatever I need. That means that I'm not giving the opponents a chance to tutor. Again, this is something that's a little delicate, a little tricksy. They may see that coming. But of course, I'm playing a general that gives everyone Grim Tutors, so but that's again a very important line to have here. Myriad Landscape is a 2-for-1 effect. It's really good. Then we have a Thawing Glaciers. This is another prime target for early game tutorage because if I go my route of dumping everyone's hand, this gives me pseudo card advantage. Every other turn, I get an extra land, and I will always have a landfall on the turn I activate this. Well, the next turn I activate this. Then we have Scrying Sheets. It is one of, now we have 32 snow lands, so 33 lands. It does not count itself unless I copy it somehow. Adds colorless, or I can pay 2 to look at the top card of my deck. If it is a snow land, I can reveal it and put it into my hand. Not draw, but card advantage. If you know a lot of my videos, you know I don't play snow-covered lands. There's a reason for that. I hate the artwork on almost every single snow-covered land. The old plains is alright. I can tolerate these. To be honest, in this style of deck, this is probably necessary. I'm not using any of the one-sided mana doublers. I don't like the extraplanar lens kind of thing, but in this deck, scrying sheets, it feels like it's necessary. So we will set these guys aside. I want to reiterate a couple things here. So, Maralen, again, this is a highly political deck. This deck is designed for a multiplayer table. If you are playing against 1 to 2 opponents, this is just not a smart idea to get. Because you are giving them access to their entire deck as early as turn 3. Like, I could do a Dark Ritual and dump her on turn 1. That seems really poor because everyone's going to go get their Soul Ring. But at the same time, this is giving me such a political play. The idea is also that if someone goes and gets a hyper-threatening permanent early game, they may want to deal with that before they deal with Maralen, which is great for me. That may also backfire because someone may combo off before we can actually do anything. Like, they may just stop us or just win before we can actually interrupt them. There's not a lot of instant speed removal, and since I am also limiting myself to a lot of cards trying to make to a late game, it just may never pan out. But just to also kind of reemphasize the most important thing, I cannot plan for her to be out 24/7, but the cards in my hand are vital if she is left alive. So I should always try to get some of these like card advantage, like the repeatable card advantage, something that I can just use over and over again to get an extra card per turn. There's not a lot. These are the primary ones I've identified right now, and Necropotence, wherever that is. The mean things to do with her are dumping everyone's hand as soon as you can. Like, you may want to just stabilize first before someone goes and wrecks you, but getting everyone down to 0 cards in hand, that's a pretty good thing. And then there's, of course, the big scary demon dude, wherever he went. The new Obnixilis. But yeah, this is my Maralen of the Mornsong deck. This is the first draft of the deck. I have not played this at all. I have never played her as a general before. And I'm going to do a lot of playtesting. We'll see what happens. If you have any feedback or ideas, if you know of any pseudo card advantage cards that put cards into my hand, please share, because that's something that actually am doing research on is kind of hard. Like, I can search specific key terms and gather, but that's not gonna give me every single card that I need. Some cards are reworded differently, and yeah. But yeah, any feedback always welcome. Again, this is my current experimental general. In the back works, I am also very slowly working on a Braids deck, which is going to be a next level deck, where I am actually just using her for land ramp. But I am having a hard time finding a suitable win condition with doing that. So that may be coming shortly. But yeah, any options, feedback, ideas, always welcome. Thanks.